A few weeks ago, Wardlow made his return to All Elite Wrestling, and since then he's been coming out week in, week out, doing what he used to do, which is the Powerbomb Symphony, in which he just comes out, destroys a jobber by power bombing his butt in that ring as many times as possible, and that got him over about a year ago, 2 years ago. And don't get me wrong, you already know my exact thoughts on Wardlow. Number one, he is one of the best homegrown stars in AEW, bar none. Number two, I've said this in the past, and I'll stand by it. Wardlow is the perfect superstar, the perfect rival, the perfect opponent for MJF to finally lose that world championship to Triple B2 in the very near future. They have so much history dating back to even before the Pinnacle, dating back to when MJF first made his start as a top heel in the company, with having Wardlow as his muscle, to the fans begging and wanting Wardlow to turn on Maxwell Jacob Friedman, turn babyface, and power bomb Max into that ring. So there's a ton of rich history to go from there in terms of a future potential world title match. Wardlow is a two-time, three-time TNT champion. I lost count because his last TNT title reign was such badly booked that it's very hard to remember. So you already know that, as far as I'm concerned, as far as the pure creative standpoint, Wardlow ending MJF's title reign, it's perfection. It would be the absolute best way to end his title reign, more than Jay White. Jay White hasn't quite gotten to the point where he can dethrone MJF and become world champion, even with the Bullet Club Gold stable, even with the fact that he had so much going for him when he made his debut, because he ended his run in New Japan Pro Wrestling. There was all this speculation on whether or not he was going to go to WWE. We got a recent backstage segment which got me excited, because Kenny Omega and MJF finally face-to-face, one-on-one in a backstage segment. MJF is very close to ending Kenny Omega's, or to dethroning Kenny Omega's longest reigning AEW World Championship reign of all time. We'll just have to wait and see how that plays out in the next few weeks in terms of AEW TV. But again, my issue currently with AEW, their creative standpoint, is they lack structure. They lack structure in how they keep their feuds, their rivalries going, and how they elevate their stars, and how they separate and properly shed spotlight on each feud, on each rivalry, in a way that puts at least one of the superstars, preferably both parties in terms of a rivalry and feud, over, and keeps them in a prominent position. And I may be biased because I've been watching wrestling for over 20 years, and I started with WWE way back in 2005, but that led into TNA Wrestling in 2009, up until this day. That led into AEW in 2019, up until this day. And at least from my point of view, and again, this is just my opinion, it's a pet peeve of mine. It bothers me when you just slingshot a wrestler into a spot that he, quote unquote, hasn't deserved on TV. He hasn't put in the work, the time on TV for. And there's two very different perspectives. Again, you could have a return like Wardlow. He's starting to target MJF once again. I believe he had the taped wristband, and it said MJF on his wristband, on his tape. Sorry, but he's been back for 3-4 weeks now, and he's barely challenging MJF right now. If you were gonna do that, then have him just return and confront MJF one-on-one in the middle of the ring. That would have been a lot better, a much bigger pop. The same thing with CM Punk, with his Real World's title, taking forever to clear up what the Real World's title was. So he starts defending it, and he expects MJF, and again, storyline-wise, he expects MJF to step up to him and find a new undisputed world champion. That's not the best way to go about in terms of feuds, in terms of rivalries. At least from my point of view. all these returns. Murder Hawk Monster, he's back. Lance Archer, he's back for the 10th time. And most of the times, he wrestles a few matches, he finds a rival, they end the rivalry, and he's gone for another while, and then he makes his 11th return and his 12th return, and they don't know what to do with him. The same with Miro and Powerhouse Hobbs and Andrade El Idolo. There's so many stars that AEW hasn't figured out how to use yet. And that's mostly because, in my opinion, they lack structure in terms of where they want to get everyone to and what position they want to get them to. It's mostly just placeholder feuds, just to buy themselves some time, and then later down the line, okay, give us some more time. Let's put Powerhouse Hobbs and Miro together in this feud, and then hopefully in the next 3-4 weeks, while they're still battling, while they end their feud at a pay-per-view during a pay-per-view match, hopefully by then we would have figured out what we want to do with them by then, instead of having a long-term plan on how to get them over with the crowd, get them to a more prominent position. And again, it's all a matter of structure. It's all about compartmentalizing your stars. And again, the best way to do so, in my opinion, is not to do an all-out, proper, on-TV execution of an AEW draft and have your Collider roster and have your Dynamite roster. No, I don't think that's the best way to go about it. But at least backstage, at least for the creative team backstage, Tony Khan, Will Washington, whoever else is in that creative booking committee, compartmentalize. Separate your stars. Separate your roster, at least internally. These storylines, these titles appear on Dynamite. These stars, these storylines, these titles appear on Collision. Sometimes we get a bit of mixture on Rampage, and we go from there. And that goes for Ring of Honor too. They have way too many championships on AEW TV, and Ring of Honor is the reason for that. And of course, in my opinion, and again, Ring of Honor to me is AEW's NXT, which means it's developmental, which means keep that roster separate and build your stars from there. And right now they've booked themselves into a corner because they have MJF as a Ring of Honor World Tag Team Champion. They have the Young Bucks and Hangman Adam Page as a Ring of Honor World 6-man Tag Team Champions. Samoa Joe is the World Television Champion, the King of Television. So all these major stars that AEW desperately needs to put on their TV to keep the show relevant are also a part of Ring of Honor. So you can't really compartmentalize on that front. And that's on them. That's entirely on them. But something's got to give in terms of how you structure returns. It can't just be for shock value. It can't just be every single week something special, because if every single week we see something special, then it stops being special because we see it every single week. So with that said, again, I may be nitpicking here. I may be, just talking out of my butt, out of my ass right now. But again, it's just something, like I said, I always enjoy professional wrestling. I keep watching Impact. I keep watching AEW. I keep watching WWE. The entertainment aspect, the wrestling aspect, that's never a fault to the companies themselves. It's just a matter of structurizing or having a proper structure to your story to get to that point. If you don't believe me, and I hate to throw this reference out there, but look at the MCU up until Endgame. That was structured. Now they're just throwing stuff on the wall, hoping something sticks, and people are far less excited about the MCU than they were 4 or 5 years ago. Just throwing that out there. So with that said, what are your thoughts on Wardlow's return? What are your thoughts on MJF being very close to becoming the longest reigning AEW World Champion of all time? And what are your thoughts on my little rant on how AEW, and to a lesser extent Impact Wrestling, structure their current superstars, structure their current feuds, their rivalries, and their shows? And should they change it, or is it working just fine? Leave your thoughts, comments, and predictions in the comment section below. In the meantime, tune in later on tonight to TBS for another episode of Wednesday Night Dynamite Live. And with that said, I'm Alexis Carrillo. This has been Wrestling Talk, and I'll see you next time.